Okay, well, welcome everybody to episode number 12 of our Flatten the Curve video blog. My name is Daniel Fong from MoveUp's Communications Department, and today my special guest is Michael Chutskoff. Now, Michael is not a MoveUp member, but he is part of our extended family. Michael's mother, Tracy, is a MoveUp member who works out of ICBC and helped connect Michael here with us today for this episode, which we happen to be filming right now during Pride Week in Vancouver. Now, before we explain a little bit about why Michael is our special guest for this week, I want to ask Michael to tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do.
All right, so I'm a full-time Aboriginal support worker at an alternate secondary school in Lanley. Basically, my job is to be available for providing social emotional support for probably about 44 kids. It depends on my caseload, as well as provide education around Indigenous issues. And also on top of my job, which is a unique aspect for me, is that I also do some SOGI curriculum and SOGI awareness and education for the kids at my school and staff as well.
So definitely, I bet, especially in the COVID era right now, there's a lot of challenges that you're facing with the work that you do. And as I mentioned off the top, this is Pride Week in Vancouver, and as you mentioned, you're a SOGI educator. And for people who aren't familiar with the acronym, SOGI stands for Sexual Orientations and Gender Identities. And a lot of people have probably heard it in connection with BC's education curriculum. What it is, it's really about learning about treating each other with dignity and respect, regardless of our differences. And Michael, you mentioned that you give these presentations at your work, but I also know that you were actually set to give a presentation for some of our members at ICBC, but that actually fell through. But I know ICBC's loss is actually our gain. So tell us a little bit about the presentation and also how long you've been doing the SOGI talks.
So for me, when I do my presentations, I usually have a general layout, but I'll never do two presentations exactly the same, simply because it comes from my Indigenous background of storytelling, where I have a roadmap and whatever is on my heart and on my mind is what I'm ultimately going to talk about. But the general theme that I was going to talk about with this, this now canceled ICBC presentation, I was going to talk about sort of my journey and how I got to where I am today as a mixed race queer man. Not exactly the easiest set of combination to, be, but I very much love who I am, and everything that I've had happen to me has made me a stronger person. And it was going to be talking about my life I had, my challenges, and how ultimately it got me to where I am today, and how it's ultimately going to push me even further in my life. And that to me is a big deal, being able to have people understand what it's like to be queer, but also be, mixed race and not looking like you're mixed race, and the associated challenges that come with people who don't even know who I am, already have these preconceived thoughts against me, and to some extremes don't even think I should be alive or have rights or be happy. And that to me is absolutely wild, because these are people I don't know, and I can walk into a room and people are already going to have those notions against me. So how do I, how did I even begin to process that? How do I begin to be comfortable in my own skin if I'm worried about how people are going to treat me when I open my mouth, or, they say something problematic and I say, well, actually, you shouldn't really say that, because as someone who's Indigenous, you can't say that, or, as someone who's queer, you can't say that. And trying to just put in the human experience and the human emotion behind my story, because I think that's the best way people learn, is by understanding, like, there's a human element to this, which I think we tend to forget, especially in the COVID era now, where everybody's online and it's really easy to be a keyboard warrior or attack somebody with a veil of anonymity. Sorry, excuse me, I can't speak. You can sit there and be anonymous and attack somebody, and it's different because you don't have that face-to-face connection, and the way you treat people is differently. So it's quite interesting too, how we could see a lot more problematic behavior appearing online now, just because it's the new place for people to go, because we can't exactly be out in our social circles right now.
And that type of abuse for anyone, like it's really inexcusable. It's I can't imagine what it must be like to have to face that. And like you mentioned, even just going into a room and having people just instantly kind of hate you without ever having met you before. I'm curious, what motivated you to actually start doing this, especially knowing the type of I guess attention that you would receive, and putting yourself in that kind of situation, because I can imagine a lot of people aren't going to be comfortable with doing that.
Yeah. Well, especially considering myself personally, like I grew up in going to a very conservative school, went to a private school, kindergarten to grade 12. So my experience with, the LGBTQ community has been was really bad at that time. And then to figure out that I was part of that community was a very tumultuous time for me, simply because there was a lot of self-hate and just plain old like unawareness. Like, here's this supposed community I'm a part of, but I know absolutely nothing about it. And now, people are asking me, what is this community? What does it mean to be a part of it? And I kind of just started doing my research and kind of, doing impromptu conversations with people and be like, this is what it means. This is what it's like to be gay, and talk about the community and the resources we have. And then through that, I kind of slowly started getting into different aspects of community involvement and education. I used to work for Health Initiative, not work, volunteer for Health Initiative for Men for a couple of years, which is the sexual health clinic. And through there, I was able to learn even more aspects of the queer community. And through that, had some educational experiences where I got to learn how to actually use my ability to talk to people and refine those skills in a way that will help everybody and myself ultimately, because when I do these types of talks, I ultimately have to make sure I'm saying what I need to say while also not saying anything that could be perceived as inflammatory. Because the last thing I want to do is take a sensitive subject and now have people come after me or their friends or their coworkers, etc. So honestly, it's just I stumbled into this. People kept asking all these questions and I didn't know, and I thought, okay, well, I should probably, answer these questions. And then as I just started doing that, I just felt more and more comfortable and having these experiences, like, with Health Initiative for Men, and I worked for the student union and at UFE, and having these opportunities just to continue educating people, it felt right. And when I started the school district 2 years ago, it was just a natural progression to help take on that role of what does it mean to be LGBTQ. For what it's worth, the Langley School District is probably one of the most fantastic school districts I've ever seen when it comes to LGBTQ awareness and SOGI education. So I'm really glad I get to be a part of that, and they're not paying me to say that. I'm actually not working right now because it's the summer, so proof that I'm not actually getting paid to say that. But it just, to me, it makes me happy to know that I can go forward and have these conversations and hopefully change, at least one or two minds to help somebody, who's a little queer kid feel better about themselves, because one person in their life is going to maybe start to get it and treat them with a little bit of dignity and respect. Because that's all humans want, is dignity and respect, no matter what your background is. It's
Absolutely.
just two core functions that we all need.
And I can really feel like the passion and the intensity, like in your voice and in your words. And I actually do want to pick up a little bit on that later on, because you mentioned about like community groups, whether it's your employer or other community groups, actually really genuinely being supportive of the community. But before I get into that, I did have a couple more questions about the presentation. One of them being, when you give these presentations, do you find it to be different when you're giving it to a more mature group, say, for example, what would have been the ICBC presentation versus giving it to a younger group? And what type of reactions do you usually get from groups when you give these presentations?
I think each group has their own different set of circumstances, but I would argue it's probably a little easier to deal with, whether it's teenagers or young adults. I mean, partly the reason why is my bias is because I already work with teenagers every day, and I work with some really interesting kids. So behavior management is like no problem for me. So I feel like I can be able to use some concepts or some phrases or some examples, and kids are more likely just to pick it up right away. When I do presentations with a more mature audience, I've noticed that I've tended to have to slow things down a lot more and do a lot more explaining, because simple terms and concepts to me, and would make sense to teenagers, there's going to be some adults in the room that are going to go, okay, like, I don't know what's going on here. I don't know what he's saying. And I tend to take a lot more of a mature approach in just the way I share. When I'm working with teens, I'm always, fun and goofy, and it puts them at ease. And I still have that goofy side to myself when I work with adults, but I have to refine it a bit, because I've noticed too that, there are some people who, are a part of these presentations, and they're going to look for any reason to discredit me. It's just the nature of the beast when you do presentations. There's always going to be somebody in the room that just does not care for you. But I've noticed that if if you're too funny all the time, then then people are going to say like, oh, he's not taking this seriously. So it's a balancing act, and it's for me, I enjoy the challenge of these subtle differences of walking into a room and then scanning the room and seeing like, okay, is this a bunch of is this a bunch of teenagers, is this a bunch of adults, is this a mixed audience, are these adults teachers? And teachers tend to be a little more aware of SOGI curriculum versus is this a room full of like 200 people that I don't know, and I don't know their profession, so I can't really make those kinds of assumptions. So it's just, to me, it's just being able to quickly scan a room and get a feel for my audience and see how I can adjust on the fly.
Now, I know presentations like SOGI presentations in workplaces, in schools, and Pride festivities, they're a lot more in the mainstream now. But I want to ask, like, in your mind, where do we have, as a society, still have to go next to be truly inclusive, to be truly accepting when it comes to this community? And I ask this question because, as you mentioned, like, your employer, the Langley School District, a fantastic employer, and I'm sure a lot of other groups that you've worked with in the past also, really, truly, genuinely are working towards, this inclusivity, this acceptance. But I know that there are, for lack of a better way of saying it, like other groups that sometimes will say one thing and maybe not and do another. And I want to bring up in particular what has been in the news lately. Now, we've seen recently the BC Liberals were caught spending advertising dollars in a publication that actively advocated for conversion therapy. And then when they were called out on it, they had at least one member of their caucus saying, well, I'm not going to stop. And when the Pride Societies came and told them, well, you know what, maybe this individual shouldn't be in your party, and if they hold those views, and especially shouldn't be the person that you have as your critic for children and family development, you can hear crickets from them. But that hasn't stopped them from still, tweeting out the platitudes and the graphics with the rainbow colors in them. So again, I'll go back to my question, which is like, what are those next steps that our society has to make to truly become inclusive and make our community safe for the members of the LGBTQ community?
We need to move past performative action. And what I mean by that is, making a big deal out of showing support, because I don't know if you've ever noticed this, but as soon as June, which is supposed to be Pride Month, June 1st, like if you go on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, like every single major corporation is suddenly going to have like a rainbow logo or like a rainbow filter to their their company's profile picture. And and then they'll usually make a couple posts that are like, we're very inclusive, blah, 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 blah. And then like, July 1st hits, and then like, boom, like all those, all those accounts are back to the normal company logos. And then you'll never hear a peep from like 99% of them on anything LGBTQ till June 1st next year. And that's like an extreme example of like, performative action where you're showing that, hey, we're super inclusive, but we're only going to do it for, like 30 months or 30 days a year. And, there's going to be an angle to it, and that's an economic gain from it, right? If we show people, hey, we're inclusive, then maybe that'll drive sales for them, or, improves purchases amongst the LGBTQ community. But for other workplaces, you can't say you're going to support LGBTQ people and LGBTQ employees, but then not go ahead and have uncomfortable conversations where you need to protect those workers from real issues of like harassment, discrimination. Is it uncomfortable? Yes. Are people going to be uncomfortable that I'm speaking today through this union? Absolutely. Are people not going to like what I say? Yes. But that doesn't mean that what you're doing should not be allowed. This has to be done. People need to be able to have the opportunity to listen and learn and treat their their coworkers with dignity and respect. Going back again, dignity and respect, that's something we all need. It's just absolutely irrefutable. But it's hard work, and it's one thing to say, yeah, I'm all for it, but then you can't falter and say, I don't want to put in the work. That's not on me, because you can't ultimately ask an oppressed party to say, hey, I know you're oppressed. I know that things are hard for you. And I know that so many of you have to wake up every day and fighting for your whole community, but we don't want to do that. So you need to continue to do that. But we're now going to, put you into our community and now you're responsible. That's not fair. That's not fair. You can't put the entire onus of education and learning on queer folk. It's not fair. And it's not right. So we need to be able to actually have spaces for queer people to actually express what it means to function in a workplace, and not just the fun stuff. Not just the, oh hey, like we're gonna we have this Pride Week. Do you want to bring snacks or talk about yourself, or hey, like bring your husband, like it'll be super fun, right? Like avoiding stuff like that, and avoiding like tokenism too, which is kind of like a reference of what I was just using for that example, is like I don't think it's right to just grab like a couple queer people and be like, look, we're inclusive because we've hired 2 people and here they are. Like, that's not going to do anything if those 2 people have to go back to work and they have to face discrimination every day because nobody wants to support them. Mm-hmm. Right. And as employers have a duty to ensure that all employees have a safe work environment. It's there. It just happens that a lot of LGBTQ folk don't really have the ability to afford those same rights, because discrimination is real. It is. And LGBTQ harassment can often be seen as discounted because it's like, oh, they just didn't know better. Well, I mean, sorry, it's 2020. You can't use that excuse anymore. And also it's 2020, we've all been locked in our houses for like the last several months. So like the internet is there, you have no excuse. Everybody's got phones. We treat the internet like it's a luxury. It's not, it's a tool, right? There are so many websites, there are so many societies, like there's just really no excuse anymore to say that, oh, I didn't know better. And employers need to be aware of that and say like, whether they're dealing with an issue of harassment or, saying like, oh, we didn't realize this policy was problematic. Like, no. Like, you need to actually do the work yourselves to kind of have to reshift your brain. Because I've had to do that. I've had to reshift my brain so much, being in a very conservative environment, to learn how to love myself, but then also how to reshift my brain so that society looks at me and says, you're acceptable. You're queer, but you're acceptable. And all queer people are asking that at least open your brain and just treat people like people, right? I'm no different from you. I'm no different from anybody else. I'm still a person. And that's what employers need to do, is they need to actually take the steps to ensure a safe work environment for LGBTQ people, and actually take active steps to ensure that any kind of issues of harassment or abuse are taken seriously, and those people who are perpetrators need to have some kind of, you know, consequence. And I'm not saying like fire them. That's like, you know, case by case basis. I'm not going to, you know, throw out a blanket thing, but like opportunities to educate, right? If somebody's going to say something problematic to me and to everybody else, I'm going to give them a chance to learn. Because if I just go after them, which is sometimes an easy solution, especially with, you know, brain functions, if somebody's going to attack you, you're going to be in the defense. It's just how it is. But, you know, I try and take that extra step and be like, okay, why is this person saying the things that they're saying to me, and give them a chance to educate themselves. And you know what, if they choose not to pass that, then that's on them, right? But people need to still have to realize what they're saying, and if they don't want to, you know, take those experiences and learn and grow, then that's a different story. That's a whole different story.
And you're right. You know what? You're absolutely right. Those uncomfortable conversations need to happen. And if there's employers out there who are watching this and they're not quite sure what that first step to take is, getting in touch with someone like you and saying of some of those presentations that you do is a pretty good first step. If people are interested, what is the best way to get in contact with you if they want to bring you in to make a presentation?
Through email. Email is the easiest way to contact me. Sometimes I'm just super busy all day, so phone calls just go unanswered because I'm trying to do a million things at once. So my email's fine. It's my first name, which is Michael, and then a period, and then Chutskoff, my last name, at gmail.com. And feel free to email me if you have questions about anything. Like I'm more than welcome to answer.
Perfect. And so just before we wrap up, again, this being Pride Week, I want to know what some of the things that you're looking forward to this year. Obviously, being in the COVID situation, we know that there's not going to be a lot of the normal parades and festivities that we're used to. But is there anything in particular that you've heard of that sounds really innovative that you're looking forward to participating in this year?
Yeah, so I've actually seen some really great examples. I've seen, you know, there was a Fraser Valley Pride event a couple of weeks ago that actually went online, and they had online drag shows, which I thought was really cool. And, you know, they had kind of like little satellite areas where you could go buy, you know, Pride themed treats from local businesses. So there were really innovative approaches to seeing Pride. But one of the big things that I'm a super fan of, like drag shows, I think are really cool. That's actually like how my mom and I have bonded, is we'll watch Drag Race together. But one thing that I think is really important for supporting the queer community, especially if you are a part of the community, is, you know, supporting drag queens and drag kings. A lot of them are now streaming online. And for those of you who don't know, drag queens usually make their money off tips, and you can't really make money off tips if there's no bars for you to perform in. And it's a very expensive gig, so you need the money. But you know, you can find drag shows like on Twitch or on a whole bunch of different websites hosted by you know, their talent firms, or they'll put it on Instagram. Like, support your queens, tip your queens. You know, I think there's a lot of really cool things out there that I can't even begin to, you know, try and share, because so many people are taking so many like amazingly different approaches. Like, I just can't even begin to commend the resiliency and the ingenuity of pride societies and organizations everywhere who have adapted to this COVID situation to still be able to celebrate their communities in just a little bit of a different fashion this year.
Awesome. And I know for our Move Up members, we actually have a Facebook group that we are putting together. Actually, we have put together for members, and the URL is actually just below on the screen here. So you can log onto our Facebook page and join that group if you're a member. And it's about celebrating and supporting the Pride community and again, taking part in a lot of different activities that are going to look a lot different this year, and hopefully, but still hopefully be able to get the message across and to show our support for the LGBTQ community. Michael, I want to thank you for joining us today. Keep up the amazing work. I know at some point, once we get over this pandemic, hopefully we'll be able to catch up with you at a future Move Up family members event. But please, anytime you want to come back and chat with us, you've got my contact information, so give us a shout.
Perfect. Thanks so much for having me. I actually really appreciated this. It was a nice change of pace to be able to, do something like this versus just staying at home and trying to not think about everything that's going on in the world. So this was awesome. Thank you so much.
No problem. Anytime.